Hi everyone, welcome to another episode on PitchCamp podcast series. This is episode 28, and today we're going to be talking to a very interesting founder from Singapore, Mr. Momo Ong, who is the founder of Headsup.ai, and very excited to have his perspectives while he's building up a sales tech startup. Some very unique perspectives and unique insights as a product management background turned into a founder and trying to build a sales tech company out of APAC. So a lot of interesting insights in this episode. Very excited to have all of you listen into PitchCamp podcast. A little bit about PitchCamp. I'm Bimlesh Gundurao and I'm the chief evangelist and coach at PitchCamp. Our entire focus and our mission is to enable 10,000 founders on helping them to share their ideas with the world better. We do this through founder-led sales coaching for early-stage startups to help them build a successful sales engine, either through a product-led growth engine or through a customer-led growth engine. So we do this through trainings and coaching programs, primarily focused at early-stage startup. So if you're one of those startups and need some help, do hit us out at pitchcamp.in and we'll be happy to get in touch with you. So welcome to today's PitchCamp podcast, Momo. Very excited to have you today on our PitchCamp podcast, and I'm glad that we had one of our previous speakers refer you into us. So welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be on this with you, Bimlesh. Thanks so much for taking time to chat.
Awesome. So talk to us a little bit about your background, Momo. So what's Headsup.ai and some backstory about what made you to get into entrepreneurship?
Yeah, let me start with my background. So right out of college, I joined a company called FiscalNote, based in DC as employee number 9. Wow. So what FiscalNote does is it's a B2B software as a service company focused on the government tech vertical. And so there, I met my now co-founder, Earl Lee. He was employee number 3. And so together, as early employees of FiscalNote, we scaled the organization from 9 to, by the time I left, more than 120 individuals, having raised 30 million plus in venture funding. And so my role at FiscalNote was initially as a data scientist, but very quickly, eventually, as a product manager. And in that product capacity, I built out the product management, design, as well as analytics teams, and worked very closely with Earl, initially who was an engineer, and eventually was also a product manager overseeing analytics to build out FiscalNote's analytics stack. And so when Earl was working on the analytics stack, he noticed specific problems there that when we decided to start something 6 years later after we met, we validated that, and it appeared that that was still an endemic problem in a lot of companies. Additionally, there were some specific tailwinds that we can go into later now that made it a really good why now proposition to start the company. And so given Earl's expertise building that in-house, giving Earl's expertise identifying the problem and solving it in FiscalNote, we thought that it made sense to do it outside and to productize it for everyone.
Wonderful. So talk to me a little bit about your product management experience. You were a product manager at Facebook, and at what point in that journey, do you see from a data scientist to a product manager, and then now to being a founder? How is this transition helping you today?
Yeah, let me speak about the latter part of your question, because I think that is also pretty relevant to my founding something. So when I joined FiscalNote, we were extremely scrappy. And as a result of that, I played a lot of hats. I wrote some engineering code, did some data science, and also helped the CEO specifically on a lot of the business items as well. So when there was a need to oversee product management, or if there was a need for product management at FiscalNote, that was a natural next step for me to do, because I had been doing that in a less formal form already. Okay. So that's what motivated my transition into product management. The fact that I would stay late every day working with the founders, thinking through the business, thinking about how to scale the business, thinking about the product, in addition to my core engineering and data science functions. So that's how I transitioned pretty organically into product management. And as the first product manager at FiscalNote, I was responsible for bringing the product from pre-product market fit, $0 in revenue, to by the time I left, mid-7 figures in recurring revenue.
Okay.
Yeah, and in addition to that, I hired, scaled, and built the product management organization from scratch. So hiring individuals, training them, scaling them. In addition to that, I also built and scaled up design and also analytics functions. Yeah.
Fantastic. Awesome. So let me pick your thoughts here. So in your opinion, since you had this amazing experience of building a product management function from scratch, from pre-revenue to leaving the company at a post-revenue stage, what were some of your key metrics to understand product market fit?
Yeah.
Or what were your leading indicators?
So a leading indicator is customer satisfaction, customer happiness, and that can be dimensionalized in many different ways. It could indicate you could see this from, for example, the feedback you get from customers when you interact with them and do user research. It could be from customer success, their feedback as they interact and successfully upsell or renew the product. It can be the market pull that you start to see as folks know about you and reach out to you for the product, right? And it can also, most importantly, be the product usage signals, where we see that there is recurring, consistent usage in the product. Now, how we got there, there was not a step change. Resolution, right? Some products out there was no product market fit, and suddenly when they made 1 or 2 changes, because of those changes, the product sold. For us, and specifically for me, my experience at FiscalNote was that it was very gradual. Initially, the product wasn't used. There were a couple of different user interface and also data deficiencies. As we plugged those, as we improved the data, as we engaged the users in the surfaces and formats that they wanted, then the value prop got clearer against the correct persona. And then we started incrementally seeing more interest, more adoption, more metrics, less churn, more upsell, etc. So I would say specifically for our legislative tracking product, we probably, if you were to determine where is the binary switch, from pre to post product market fit, that didn't occur for 1.5, 2 years after the company was founded. And I think this is consistent with what Jason Lemkin says. As a SaaS founder, it takes up to 24 months to get to that initial state of product market fit. And by the way, that is only for the first product. Every incremental product that you build, if you need to localize or internationalize, those are additional steps where you have to re-obtain product market fit.
Right. And also a change in segment, right?
Yes, that as well, as you go up market.
Fantastic. Awesome. So with this, with this sort of a background, what was a trigger moment to start Headsup?
Yeah. So I've always wanted to start something, and my motivation for that was being part of the FiscalNote family, seeing my boss, the CEO, scale this company, right? Like, I was part of the executive team. I was part of the first couple of founding team, and I really experienced that as an employee. And I saw everything being built on the product side. I saw the money being raised. I saw the functional organization, sales, success, marketing, design, product, all being built out. I felt that I had the knowledge and the know-how to be able to replicate that. And so that was what motivated me to, years later, start a SaaS business.
Okay. And how did you zero in on this particular problem at Headsup?
Yeah, that's also a very good question. So when Earl and I started talking and working together, we knew that we wanted to build for the customer-facing persona. And the reason was twofold. First, we had an interest in that persona. And second, we had a lot of experience at FiscalNote building the tooling for that persona as the company rapidly scaled. Okay. So the needs of sales at Series Seed are very different from the needs of sales at Series A, B, and C. And we were privy to those interactions. And so we felt that we had strong empathy with such personas to be able to build tools that would successfully support them. So those were the two reasons why we decided initially to focus on the customer-facing persona. But when we double clicked into the core needs of sales individuals and customer success individuals, what we learned was that they didn't yet want another CRM. They didn't yet want another customer success tool. We found that the gap that existed in market today was that there was so much data within an organization, but none of that data was accessible nor actionable for the go-to-market teams. So that was the problem we lasered on, right? Coincidentally, this was also the problem that Earl had identified and tackled while at FiscalNote overseeing analytics. So because of that, we had familiarity. We had done it before. We had empathy with the persona. And lastly, because of Earl's expertise on the analytics side, and because of my interest in analytics, I had explored analytics and data infrastructure ideas previously and also invested in a couple of deals in that vertical. That made for the perfect fit.
Awesome. There's a question, maybe I should have asked it a little earlier. So give us a brief about what does Headsup.ai currently do and what's your vision on Headsup.ai, and then we'll go forward from there.
Yeah, let's start with what we currently do. So Headsup.ai syncs data from your cloud data warehouses and other data sources within the company downstream to your customer-facing tools. So tools that customer-facing personas use. So the Salesforces and the Gainsights of the world. Now, why is that data important? The reason that data is important is because you can, for example, create product lead scores that allow sales individuals, like account executives, to prioritize which leads to go after. Likewise, on the customer success side, product usage data within the organization are leading indicators for churn, upsell opportunity, and generally the healthiness of a customer. Yeah, given the fact that all of this data is being collected today in every digital native company, we find that there's an opportunity to allow the client-facing individuals, client-facing personas, to take advantage of that data to better meet revenue objectives and to better serve customers.
Got it. So you're focusing on a micro use case, which is a gap in the entire sales funnel activities. Right.
Can we level set on what you mean by micro use case?
When I say micro use case, is you're picking up one step in the activity of an entire sales funnel, right? Which is the lead scoring. Is that a fair understanding?
Yes, but in the long term, you could imagine that there are different types of scores to motivate different actions.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
So, for example, marketing has certain scores to qualify and rank leads, right? And the leads that are qualified the highest currently become MQLs.
Right.
These are then taken by sales, and the sales runs with them. But there's also ways to score, for example, sales leads as well, especially based if they're freemium tiers. You can score them based on their whether these leads currently use the product, right? And likewise, post-sale, there's opportunities to score as well. So we think that the concept of scoring is less so of a point solution in the funnel and can be integrated into many different parts of the funnel.
Right. Yeah. Today, it's primarily used only between MQL and SQL. Right?
Yeah. And the customer success side to identify healthiness of the customer. But we think there's many opportunities there. Yeah, especially when there's so much data being collected within and without of the organization.
Got it. Fantastic. So when you zeroed in on this problem, talk to me about some of the insights that you gathered when you started reaching out to early users as part of your research process. What were some of the insights? How many people did you speak to, interview with, to understand if this is a really pain point? That they are willing to, that they face and that they are willing to pay.
Yeah. So conservatively, we've probably spoken to more than 300-400 go-to-market individuals, go-to-market leaders by this point.
Wow.
And I would say, in terms of core insights, it depends on the seniority of the leader, the function, the specific organization, right? Now, let's say for our specific ideal customer profile, which is, by the way, Series A and above product-led growth companies, so companies that have a free to paid conversion workflow. I would say, if you ask me the core insights, it would be number one, that the current ecosystem for go-to-market tools is not optimized and not built for product-led growth go-to-market motions. And as a consequence, we see existing go-to-market teams string together existing tools in a hacky manner to serve their specific needs.
Okay.
I think that's number one. Now, double-clicking into that, why is it that the current tools underserve the said persona in the said tailwind of PLG? We think one of the main reasons is that the tools are not equipped to handle the explosion of data. So in PLG, in the world of product-led growth, we have an explosion of data in two primary axes. First, there's an increasing number of data points collected per user. Not only are you recording just sales and marketing interaction data, you're also recording product usage data as well as billing data. Right, so many more data points per user. The second axis is that there are many more users, right?
Mm-hmm.
A company like Notion or Figma might have millions, if not tens of millions of free users.
Right.
All of those need to be recorded and taken accounted for as well. So suddenly you have this explosion of data resulting in extremely poor signal to noise ratios. And so marketing, sales, and success with their existing tools, we found are not as well equipped as they can be to address and to do their jobs. So that's the next insight. And as a consequence of that, actually, we think that there's going to be. Oh, actually, let's just stop at these two insights. I would say those are the two primary insights that we learned, and those are actually the two insights on which we're building Headsup.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So how easy was it to reach out to all these, your GTM leaders? What channels did you use to reach out to them? What sort of early resistance that you saw, or many of them were in cognizance with your intent in trying to research and solve this problem?
Yeah. So the way we reached out via whatever channel we had. If we had prior relationships, obviously we engaged them. If we had potential investors or we had friends in our network, we asked them for introductions. So we didn't have one specific formal channel that worked.
Okay.
We did whatever we could to get introductions, to network, to be able to get in front of folks that mattered to us.
Got it.
And with regards to their reception and their response to what we pitch, generally, if the initial customer profile is correct, we saw quite a warm and common understanding of this. For example, we recently spoke to a post-IPO company, B2B SaaS IPO company that actually just exploded during COVID. And one of the leaders on the sales enablement side had independently of us conceived of a very similar idea and identified exactly the same pain points and opportunities. So that, for example, we like to think is independent validation of our approach.
Right, absolutely. That makes a whole lot of difference when one of your target personas is exactly looking to solve the same problem that you are working on, and they would want to have that solution right in their hands now.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a great place to be in. Fantastic. So you're based out of Singapore, and you're talking to GTM leaders, I'm guessing across the world, predominantly between US and Singapore right now. And did you see this problem statement alignment to be similar between both these regions? When I say Singapore, we can take APAC as well.
Yeah, so I would say that our market, first and foremost, is the United States, and second, the European Union.
Okay.
Because that's where software as a service is most mature, and that's also where product-led growth is the most mature, right? Cost of customer acquisition has exploded over the last couple of years in SaaS,
right,
in those two regions, and therefore there's a need to, and also in addition to that, there's a democratization of the buying cycle. There's much more focus on the end user, and so because of that, product-led growth has taken off in those two regions. In Singapore, the enterprise and the B2B market generally is much more nascent, but we're starting to see a couple, very strong founders building B2B businesses here. But I would say even those predominantly still sell into the US. Yeah. So you can classify them essentially as US-like B2B SaaS companies. And I believe we're starting to see that a similar pattern in India as well, although India is much more mature than Southeast Asia at this point with regards to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. What have you seen as some of the fundamental shifts in customers adopting to new SaaS solutions, and how these have changed during the whole transformative last year, right? Which is the entire COVID year. I'll ask you this question from two perspectives. One, as a founder, some of the trends that you're seeing in SaaS, and second, as a product manager, what are you seeing as some of the trends that some of these SaaS companies are looking to adopt in a COVID world?
So as a founder, one of the trends that we specifically bet on is the centralization of data within a cloud data warehouse. Mm-hmm. Because that makes it very easy to connect simply to that cloud data warehouse to gain access to all the data that we need to send downstream into the client-facing team's applications. Now, we see that the adoption of cloud data warehouses and also the utilization of cloud data warehouses beyond just simply an analytics store has increased in many companies. Even companies that are Series A, Series B, we see are either talking about adapting a data warehouse or already adapting a cloud data warehouse. So we've definitely seen that tailwind in market. In addition to that, basically every investor or founder or client that we talk to also are very aware of that, are very much aware of that as well. So, there's word of mouth in the street, and in market, we also see this adoption happening. So that's one tailwind as a founder. We definitely bet on, and we've identified.
All right.
Tailwind that as a founder, I've been able to work off is basically the fact that most go-to-market processes are done over the internet now via Zoom and whatever tools that folks use, right? And so that impacts me and us in two ways. One, personally, because I'm sitting out of Singapore, I can just as successfully sell into the US as someone sitting in the US because everyone is remote.
Right.
Two, it means that there's ever more amount of data being recorded, right? And it worsens the signal to noise ratio, as I mentioned earlier, making this an even bigger opportunity for Headsup to tackle.
Fantastic. I like the point that you're being able to zero in very nicely on your ICP, right? You're targeting SaaS companies which are above Series A and above, and who have a product-led growth as their primary function of growth, right? What are you seeing some of the trends on how product-led growth itself is changing now? Or has that remained the same over the last couple of years with the SaaS becoming more prevalent in B2B?
So first of all, there's a democratization of knowledge about how to run the product-led growth process across multiple functions in the company, from product all the way to the client-facing teams. Mm. So, for example, companies that we've spoken to that are tier 1 PLG companies like Figma, Notion, and Airtable are extremely sophisticated in their thinking, in their consumption of data, and in their using that data to motivate client-facing actions. I think we've previously seen this similar level of sophistication at more mature companies like Dropbox and also Asana, but that level of sophistication has since been distributed to other companies that are relatively small as well. So I'd say number one is increased sophistication and increased knowledge dissemination around product-led growth. I'd say number two is that top-down go-to-market motion companies are also exploring bottoms-up channels as well.
Okay.
So we have a lot of folks that we've talked to, a couple of companies that are relatively mature, have an existing product with resonance at the enterprise level, and they're considering how to either A, utilize product-led growth as a means of customer acquisition towards enterprise or even mid-market, or B, to see whether there's a subset or a simplified product that can directly serve mid-market and make that a sustainable revenue channel as opposed to just being a lead channel.
Right. Do you think it's important for a product-led growth company to always go with a freemium business model?
If it's not a freemium business model, it is a limited trial, right?
Right.
Yeah. I would say, and I mean, there's really good articles about the trade-offs between always free versus trial, right? But the nuance and the gist of this is that on the flip side, you can also make a mistake, I think similar to what some companies have done in the past, where they've given way too much value on the free trial, rendering very limited need or pressure to move up market. Move to a paid version, right? So there's always risks and trade-offs there. But I think in order to design a PLG motion that makes sense, one must start from first principles, right? What is the purpose of PLG? What are we trying to solve here? Are we trying to, for example, create a rapid fan base that consistently uses the product and can socialize the product elsewhere, right? Which really helps with like word of mouth, brand dissemination. Or are we trying to eventually upsell this fan base or this free tier into some sort of paid tier? Or is the free tier some sort of lead generation for sales individuals to go top down and execute the pincer go-to-market motion, right? Understanding what the goal of the PLG motion is will allow the company to successfully solve for the outcomes. And the outcomes are not strictly, they're not mutually exclusive, right? For example, we see that Notion successfully has a free tier, which really helps for the brand. Folks love it. But in addition to that, they make substantive revenue from a credit card swiped next paid tier, right? And lastly, the free and paid tiers also inform enterprise go-to-market motions that they're ramping up right now.
All right. Pick a thread from what you mentioned on the fan base, right? So we are seeing, earlier we had customer-led growth. Now we see a motion of product-led growth, and in that we have a subset on, building out a fan base, which is nothing but, in another sense, it's all about building communities around what you're trying to solve. Right. What do you think on using communities as a strategy to build a successful business?
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of companies have realized, is the power of PLG, right?
Right.
Also, what a lot of open source companies are exploring as well. Open source takes that to the extreme. There's a community before there's even a free product, right? There's an open source product, and eventually, after the community is sufficiently large and the product is sufficiently mature and there's product market fit, then there's a cloud hosted version. Or, there's open source is another topic of conversation where we can spend a lot of time on.
Right.
But generally speaking, then there's monetization via cloud hosted services. And then the enterprise versions are either, for example, on-prem hosted or have security and collaboration features, right? So yes, I would say there are many companies that have successfully executed that motion to create community via open source, via freemium,
right?
To successfully monetize to successfully monetize their paid offerings both at the mid-market and also enterprise levels.
At what stage do you think focusing on building communities as a marketing channel is important? Do you do that very early on as a commercial product and not as an open source product? Would you start say, for example, where Headsup is at right now?
Yeah.
Are you thinking of building a community of GTM leaders now, or this is something that you do it after you have achieved a product market fit?
So I would say the former, and that's still something that we're trying to figure out. But we think there's immense value around quote unquote building in public. We've seen that building in public, especially when you're exposed to the audience that is relevant for you, results in A, tighter product feedback loops, B, much higher customer empathy, and C, much more brand exposure and community fan base, which results in much better customer acquisition down the line.
Got it. Yeah, and also creates a huge amount of loyalty, right?
Yes.
Between people within the community. Obviously, communities are a double-edged sword. You can have someone who is brutally loyal. At the same time, the same community can punish you, if you don't serve the community well.
100%. 100%. So that's why I actually think Actually, one of the things that I'm feeling more and more convinced about is that as software as a service, engineering and technical moats drop towards zero, the way to establish long-term differentiation is by A, building a category, well, this topic of category creation, and B, having a community that really buys into this category as being something that's useful, and the community that sees the problem and understands the relevance of the category. And this is something that David Cancel speaks at length about and has executed very well for Drift. And there's some really great podcasts that he, where he walks through his methodology and how he spent a lot of effort to learn and execute on this.
Got it. So we have been talking a lot about product-led growth companies. So typically for a product-led growth company, what does a good tool stack look like?
Yeah. I mean, good is very different from what is a current tool stack, right? So I'll start with what is a current tool stack. And the truth is, on the go-to-market side, there are so many tools that it's hard to have, say, a canonical or vanilla set of tools. But I can kind of walk through some tools that folks normally use. So on the growth or marketing side, there's normally some sort of marketing automation platform, for example, a Marketo, right? That then sends leads downstream into a sales tool, a CRM, for example,
right?
A Salesforce or a HubSpot. Now, the average sales individual at AE, I believe, uses something like 8 different tools. So there's sales enablement tools like Outreach and SalesLoft. There's productivity user interfaces like Scratchpad and Dually for individual AEs and SDRs to very quickly enter information or record and update Salesforce. There's conversational intelligence tools like Gong that record and helps managers give feedback and train AEs and SDRs on their talking tracks. There's lead generation and lead collection tools like the Sales Whales, the Chili Pipers of the world.
All right.
I mean, there's a lot more other things that I for sure have missed out, but that's the sales ecosystem. And then on the customer success side, which is relatively much more immature, there are customer success tools like Gainsight, Tatango, and as well as up and coming ones like Catalyst. Yeah. Now, all of those are strung together, connected by thin, brittle integrations that pass, for example, data or a subset of data from marketing to sales to customer success. We think that there's opportunity to rethink what that tool chain looks like in the product-led growth world. And that's what we're trying to figure out in the long term.
Interesting. So what's your long-term vision? Assume that you hit product market fit. You have got great traction amongst product-led growth companies, suiting your ICP that stands as of today. Yeah. Where do you see Headsup, naturally evolving in this data space?
Yeah. So to answer that, let's go back to the problem prompt again, right? The problem prompt is that there's very poor signal to noise ratios because there's an explosion of data, making it very hard for customer-facing teams to decide who to engage, how to engage, and when to engage. So that is fundamentally the problem that the Headsup vision, or actually that's our mission, right? To solve that specific problem. Now, what is our vision and what is our approach? That is to be determined, but you can imagine that there's a data-driven approach, right? Because we're, for example, Power Rigs lead scoring right now, right? Through the combination of data into one single source of truth and then acting on that. So that's our first wedge. But what we do next is to be determined. Yeah.
Got it.
But one can imagine that on top of this data, we ask what else is doable, what else is feasible, and we build from there.
Okay. Taking another segue from here.
Yeah.
So if today a SaaS company is trying to look at product-led growth as a strong motion of sales today,
yeah,
what are some of the key building blocks that they should consider?
Got it. So let me, as opposed to offering out the solutions, let me respond by saying here are the general functionalities that need to be there. Number one, they need to have a very good understanding of product usage and other internal signals, and they need to understand how those signals relate to willingness to pay and willingness to buy. So that's number one. That's functionality. Number two is they need to have an engagement model where, upon the identification of said signals, there's a go-to-market process to close and upsell these individuals. Now that could be automated, it could be in person, or it could be mixed depending on the price point and the vertical. Yep. And the suitability of that space to be sold automatically. Yeah. And then I would say from the post-sale perspective, likewise, there needs to be a very strong understanding of, exactly what usage signals are leading indicators for churn, upsell opportunities, and generally customer health. And folks need to have a very clear playbook against those leading indicators. And lastly, the product needs to be engineered in such a way such that it can organically acquire users through some sort of, for example, growth loop where someone uses it, would share, or there's a very methodical marketing way to generate these free users. Yeah.
Got it. Fantastic. Let me shift gears here and talk. Pick your thoughts on your entrepreneur journey, right? So, talk to me a little bit of some of your key learnings and key unlearnings that you had to do as you got started with Headsup.
Yeah, I think the key learning is that as a product manager, I like to think that I'm a very strong operator, that I can build product very quickly, and that I can build product and iterate very fast towards product market fit. What I've learned in this journey, obviously, I haven't been at it for so long, is that there's so much luck and uncertainty in the process, regardless of how good you are, right? That's number one. And as a corollary to that, market is really everything. Market, in my opinion, before founder and team. Because if there's a huge tailwind, if there's like huge willingness to pay, and if there's a gap, the pull from the market is incredible. And conversely, if you have a solid team and there's no market there, well, first of all, a solid team you would say that the solid team would identify the market. But if you have a solid team and there's no market there, no matter how good of a product you build, it'll be very, very hard to sell. And so I think as an entrepreneur and also as a venture investor, market selection at the very beginning is probably the most important thing one can do. Mm-hmm. Market selection is not a binary thing. It's not like, I select the market today, I'm done. There's this concept of an idea maze that Chris Dixon and Balaji talk about, and being able to pick a big general addressable market and execute on the idea maze towards something where there is sufficient pull, I think is a skill set that as an entrepreneur, if you're consistently good at, is extremely high expected value. Yeah. And that's expressly very different from, say, what a product manager would do day to day in a 1 to 100 product, right? Yes, right. That might be something a product manager needs to do that day to day in a 0 to 1 product. But as an employee and as a PM, your search space is much, much smaller than as an entrepreneur, right? As an entrepreneur, your search space is literally everything. It's every market. You constrain that to, say, a sub-market like, sales and data or PLG and data like we do. But even then, the search space is very, very wide. So being able to deal with that uncertainty, being able to build conviction, and being able to iterate on the idea maze, I think are probably the biggest skill sets that, I would look for in a founder. Yeah, so that'll be a learning.
Awesome. So, coming towards the end of the podcast, what's been your couple of eureka moments, as you're building up Headsup.ai in a completely remote world today, or share some of those with us.
I think being in a remote world, being able to work effectively in a remote world means having a culture that's appreciative of remote functionality. Mm-hmm. And I think that's actually something that companies that, for example, were built before this post-COVID remote world might have trouble appreciating. Like one of the struggles we've had is to deal with the intensity of work and potential burnout as folks are always on, right? Like personally, I'm up at 4 or 5 a.m. taking calls. until say 12 noon, 1 p.m. And then after that, there's work, and at night, the calls ramp up again. So there's really not an opportunity for me to stop working. And right. I think other team members feel similarly as well. So instituting, for example, notions of culture that allow for a longer term marathon as opposed to a sprint is very, very important. Yeah. And that might be less of an issue in the past. For example, when we were all in person, right? Like when everyone goes home at the end of the day, yes, we can work a little bit at night, but then that's it, and then you come back at 9 a.m. in the morning. But for me in Singapore, I feel like it is possible to work 24 hours a day, right? Like folks in America are awake, then folks in Singapore are awake when America sleeps. So having a culture of sustainability and being very explicit on the resultant tactics of that culture, I think is very important. The other thing that we've learned is that there's very strong talent across engineering and non-engineering roles across the globe. One just has to look hard enough, right?
Right.
And I think that might actually be a tactical or a strategic advantage for startups who can master a sustainable and effective way to work remotely. For folks who can master that, they're able to hire at a much higher quality or much lower cost.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. In fact, actually, startups have been from a talent democratization point of view, startups have had the biggest advantage in this COVID world of accessing talent across the globe and building futuristic remote teams.
100%. Yeah, right. I agree.
Some of the larger companies, still have these restrictions on their job boards, which says that remote only within their country, or remote or a near shore remote, rather than trying to really look at a global remote model.
Yeah, I agree. I think the time zone issue is one that is not trivial to circumvent or overcome, right, and requires a very specific work style or a very strong culture. Yeah, and folks that can solve that specifically, big or small, will have a lot of advantages.
This entire journey of transitioning from a product manager to an entrepreneur, Momo, as we come to towards the end of this podcast, what will be your key 3 takeaways if you had to look back for the product management community that you would recommend as a skill or areas that they need to broaden their horizon?
Yeah. So number 1 would be selling. I think as a PM, yes, you need to sell internally, but there's much less external client-facing go-to-market motion. As a founder, that's paramount. Being able to do that at the very beginning can make or break the company, right? And founder sales is especially dire or very hard because oftentimes you're asking someone to take a bet on something that either doesn't exist yet or hasn't been proven, right? So being able to successfully do that, being able to get that one design partner that is exactly the ICP can allow you to build very, very good product, especially if you're a product manager and can get exposed to all the pain points. So I think learning to sell and doing that in a very methodical and sustainable way for the first 1 or 2 years of the company from 0 to 1 million in ARR is, I think, a very important skill that might not be consistently flexed as a product manager.
Got it. Fantastic. This has been an amazing conversation, Momo. Thank you so much for your time. I really picked up some great insights. The IdeaMaze analogy that you gave, having not many founders have this great clarity early on their ICP. I'm very excited, with your journey, and I look forward to be in touch. And hopefully, when you hit, a huge revenue growth cycle, we'll be happy to host you again to get that part of the story on our podcast again.
Yes. So thank you forward to that.
So thank you once again for being on the PitchCamp podcast today.
Thank you so much.
Fantastic. So this is it, folks. We come to the end of today's podcast number 28. This podcast is going to be available on all the podcasting platforms, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, and so on. So follow us on YouTube, on Spotify, and on Apple Podcasts, and be in touch with us at pitchcamp.in, your founder-led sales coach and your partner in your growth journey. With this, signing off, and have a great day, all of you. Thank you so much.